dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man
Stanley
Thinkin.
Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM in North Florida, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB, News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy Labor Day to all. Let's get started with a take on Houston. Not the hurricane, not Hurricane Harvey, but Houston and what's happening or has happened there. Of course, they are going through Hurricane Harvey and its aftermath, and Hurricane Harvey is now on record as delivering the most rainfall to the North American continent in history, is my understanding. As the storm was heading toward the Texas coast and had not made land yet, the Republican governor, yes, it does matter that he is a Republican, Governor Greg Abbott, issued this warning to the state's residents.
This is going to be a very major disaster.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott sounding the alarm on Hurricane Harvey, urging residents to evacuate as the most powerful storm to hit the U.S. mainland in more than a decade barrels toward Texas.
If you are in areas between Corpus Christi and Houston, and maybe even some other areas, especially low-lying areas, you need to strongly consider evacuating.
Abbott said the hurricane is expected to come inland and then hover for days, dropping tremendous amounts of rain and causing record flooding in multiple locations.
And put your life first and your property second.
Forecasters say Harvey will make landfall near Corpus Christi around 8 or 9 p.m. local time Friday and drop 3 feet of rain along the central Texas coast. The Category 4 hurricane could bring winds between 110 to 130 miles per hour, potentially uprooting trees and ripping roofs off homes.
Its future is uncertain.
In Louisiana, New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu says Harvey is not expected to hit their state, but will cause heavy rainfall and flooding starting Sunday through the end of next week.
We believe that our drainage system can handle this forecast.
On Friday, President Trump tweeted, quote, "I encourage everyone in the path of hashtag Hurricane Harvey to heed the advice and orders of their local and state officials."
And Harvey, I stand corrected, Harvey actually got to Texas on the 25th, Friday the 25th of August, so the warning from the governor came a few days beforehand as it was heading into the end of that week. The next day, however, the Democrat governor of Houston, he and the spokesman of the emergency management operations for Houston, I believe also for Harris County, decided they needed to contradict the mayor and say that we're not going to evacuate Houston. Now, the city of Houston, 2.4 million people, the fourth largest city in the United States, is also built on marshland that is basically at sea level and really cannot drain. And 50 inches of rain was headed their way, and they had been told. So although the governor tells them one thing, the mayor decides that's not the right thing to do. And he defended his statement in this manner.
But the reality is this is unprecedented. There's a lot of rain. So which neighborhood would you have to evacuate? Quite frankly, every neighborhood, every community received water and flooded. Every bayou went over its banks. You cannot put, in the city of Houston, 2.3 million people on the road. That is dangerous. For Houston, Harris County got a lot of rain, a lot of flooding. When you combine Houston and Harris County, you literally cannot put 6.5 million people on the road. If you think the situation right now is bad, you give an order to evacuate, you are creating a nightmare, especially when it's not planned. And many of us in the city remember when the evacuation order was ordered before, and we've learned our lesson from that. It has to be very well coordinated, all the way from Houston to the destination point. You have to make sure that you have proper gas stations. You have to make sure that you have the proper lanes that are flowing in the right direction. It has to be coordinated. If you do it or attempt to do it and it's not coordinated, not done right, you are literally putting people in harm's way, and you're creating a far worse situation. In this particular case, the hurricane, we were not in the direct line. Now, it is true, we anticipated a lot of rain, but the best place is for people to be in their homes. Now, we've had a few fatalities. Every person is important, even if it's one. Every person is important. But let me tell you, you issue an evacuation order and you put everybody out on the highway, then you're really asking for a major calamity.
Is there anything?
We have had an unprecedented amount of water. Last night, for example, you had water 3 and 4 inches in an hour. Now, I don't care who you are. I don't care what city you're in. Okay, you are going to have flooding. And when it is continuous, as it was last night, over into this morning, you are going to have major flooding. Now, recognizing that, we can still manage the outcome.
So how well did he manage the outcome? Here's one thing. Now, remember, at this point, as of this recording, we have more than 45 people dead in the area where Harvey made landfall, including Houston. How well did you manage that? You're worried about a few. Now it's, wow. But here's something that I found very interesting. Daily Beast published this on the 28th, which was the Monday after Harvey made landfall. Houston orders first evacuation stopped. Now, let me get this straight. It was going to be chaos if you ordered evacuations before the storm arrived, when the streets and roads and highways were passable. Now, days after you told everyone to stay put, and after interstate highways have enough water on them that the water reaches the signs that are perched above them, now that people are actually using jet skis to navigate streets, now you order evacuations. Are you serious? So when people say, oh, you're trying to make this political, no, you made this political. You said you can't move people out of the city. You couldn't move it out of the city when the streets were passable, but now you're ordering people to get out of the city. You can't get people out of the county when the roads in and out of it were passable, but after it hits, now you want to order evacuations? The coordination that you need, you've had 12 years since Hurricane Rita hit city of Houston. Did you think nothing else was ever coming your way? Did you not bother to coordinate in any way in the past 12 years to make sure you understood that you had a plan to get as many people out of the path of danger as possible? The simple answer is no, you didn't. But you can't issue an order because of the calamity that it would cause. But after the calamity has come, now you can issue an evacuation order. See, understand this. Democrats are going to hang you out to dry. It's what they do. It's what they do. But for me, as bad as Hurricane Harvey has been in Texas, hitting Texas, going back into the Gulf, getting more water and hitting Texas again, let me just say this. Unless I'm going to go there to do something, or unless I'm checking on how money that's donated is being spent, I'm really tired of the coverage, because the coverage isn't telling me anything I don't know. Natural disasters cause terrible suffering, and I know that. When I heard about it spinning in the Gulf, that was troubling. When I saw the damage that it wrought coming ashore, that was alarming. But then I saw Americans being Americans, saving themselves, not waiting for the government to do it, looking for others to save, taking their own boats and going around in neighborhoods, sometimes neighborhoods that weren't even theirs, risking their own well-being to secure that of other people. Now, once I saw that, my news cycle was done. I knew my country was still America, still got each other's back, and as long as it's Americans dealing with whatever comes along, then it's safe to go back to life as usual. Now, if you're the media, which is looking for someone to blame, to vilify, they even went after Joel Osteen. Now, I have a lot of reasons to go after Joel Osteen, but this was, kind of not one of them, and the information they used seemed to be questionable at best. Or if you're an Antifa terrorist who's claiming to be doing great work in the Houston area, helping people out, yeah, right. Or a Black Lives Matter liar, and they're basically absent while this is going on because I guess not enough black people are involved. Interestingly, though, some black people in Houston who actually met President Trump and did not have a favorable opinion of him beforehand at an evacuation shelter now seem to think well of him. They've even posted selfies that they took with him while he met with them in the shelter, which goes back to an interesting phenomenon. The number of people who have actually sat down with President Donald John Trump, who happen to be black and sit down with him, the number who come out of that meeting having anything negative to say about him continues to be just about none. I find that fascinating. Also, if you're a progressive or a Democrat, you're not going to stop watching this coverage. You're not going to stop generating these news stories. You're going to ride this pony as hard as you can because you got to find something bad to say about somebody to try to justify your existence because you don't want to really report the news. So for me, I'm done with the coverage. And for those who ask why, I tell them this. I don't have to watch certain things happen to know that they will. I only need to see somebody hold a ball off the ground and drop it to know that it's going to fall. I don't need to see the impact. Similarly, I only need to see my countrymen challenged. I already know what the American response is going to be. And I've seen it. And I'm good. Houston is going to suffer because of what came from without. But Houston, Texas, and the country will likely be fine because of that which comes from within. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 in North Florida, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's discuss Hollywood for a minute and parallel that with the mainstream media. Hollywood has a major problem right now, but it didn't start right now. As a matter of fact, the things that were leading up to it were laid out by two of the industry's biggest directors, that would be Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, back in 2013.
In the future, watching movies might cost you $150. Hi, I'm Yi, and this is the Run List. According to The Independent, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas predicted a meltdown in the movie industry yesterday. For all the hopefuls at University of California School of Cinematic Arts, where they were speaking, this must have been a blow. Instead of inspiring the film students with promising talk of a career in filmmaking, the two directors instead said it is an interesting time for the film industry. I think by interesting, they mean Rocky. Spielberg, director of Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park, basically the man who made childhood awesome, said that Hollywood studios are only interested in investing in blockbuster movies that will appeal to everyone and will likely earn a ton of money. This is because people have so many entertainment options nowadays, studios are likely to lose money by producing films that may be great in quality but do not have mass appeal, like biopics and indie films. He said, "You're at the point right now where a studio would rather invest $250 million in one film for a real shot at the brass ring than make a whole bunch of really interesting, deeply personal, and even maybe historical projects that may get lost in the shuffle." And Spielberg should know. He reportedly had difficulty getting his Oscar-winning film Lincoln onto the big screen. It almost aired on HBO as a television film, and this is Steven Spielberg we're talking about. Imagine how difficult it would be for a new filmmaker fresh out of college to get studios interested in their movies. Another problem is, when a $250 million blockbuster fails, that's a big loss for the studios, and if several of these blockbusters flop, then Hollywood would be forced to change its current business model and charge more for each blockbuster, creating a gap between blockbuster pricing and other films. He says audience may end up having to pay $25 for the next superhero epic like Iron Man and only $7 to see an artsy historical film like Lincoln. Lucas, creator of Star Wars, agreed with Spielberg and said, "What you're going to end up with is fewer theaters, bigger theaters with a lot of nice things. Going to the movies is going to cost you $50, maybe $100, maybe $150. Yikes. Spielberg thinks that a lot of great filmmakers may be forced to put their less mainstream work on television, and the small screen may become the big screen for more outside-of-the-box films. And if movie tickets really cost $150, a lot of us might just choose to watch TV instead. I know I would. So what do you think is going to happen to the film industry? Do you agree with Spielberg and Lucas? Comment below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out more videos from the Run List.
Well, whether you agree with the assessment of Spielberg and Lucas, what they said is actually beginning to happen. Hollywood is more interested in blockbusters, and those blockbusters are not always doing well. But that was in June of 2013. In December of 2014, some of what Spielberg and Lucas were talking about was already coming to pass.
This Sony hack comes in the middle of a rough year for Hollywood. Industry figures show a 17% drop in the number of frequent moviegoers between the ages of 18 and 24. CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here with more on this. Jill, when Hollywood loses that demographic, it's a bad sign. Why?
Well, I think that entertaining spending habits are really changing. We see that with younger demos and also men who are spending a lot more money on video games. You know, the video gaming industry has now become twice as big as the film industry. Now, everyone else, they seem to be streaming a lot more. They're paying for Netflix or Amazon Prime, streaming up 60% from a year ago, television viewing and film sales both down 4%.
The economy's been improving overall, but there's still this middle-class squeeze going on. Wages have been stagnant. Is that playing into this as well?
I think so. I mean, wages just increasing about at the rate of inflation, but certain parts of people's budgets have been increasing. So look at healthcare, which from 2007 to 2013, up 24%. People's cell phone bills up by 50%. That doesn't give you a lot of room. And you add to that the fact that if you take a family of four out to the movies across this country, it's going to cost you about $80, including your tickets and your popcorn and your soda. That's 10 months of your Amazon or Netflix subscription. It makes the choice a lot easier.
Jill, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So they're losing the demographic. Young men are opting for video games instead of films, which really, despite what somebody may think, it really comes down to this. Let's be very honest. Video games are repetitive and they're boring. But when somebody would rather play a quote-unquote boring and predictable video game than go to the movie to see what you can come up with that is not something inside their own head, yeah. And the cost is going up. So those two things are really a problem for Hollywood. But Mark Wahlberg, last December, actually in a very short statement, nailed what may be the real problem for Hollywood.
Hello, I'm Diana Falzone for Fox 411. Patriots Day star Mark Wahlberg is out talking about his new movie about the Boston Marathon bombing, but the one thing he won't discuss is politics. And he wishes his fellow actors would follow his lead. Wahlberg told Task and Purpose magazine, quote, "A lot of celebrities did, do, and shouldn't talk politics," adding that celebs are, quote, "pretty out of touch with the common person, the everyday guy out there providing for their family." The actor said he keeps it real because he started with nothing. And while he loves what Hollywood has provided for him, he says, quote, "I also understand what it's like to not have all that." Do you agree with Marky Mark? Should celebs steer clear of politics? Tell us what you think on Facebook or Twitter with the hashtag Fox411.
Let me say this. I don't believe the issue is whether or not celebrities stay out of politics. It is what Mark Wahlberg said, you're out of touch. You don't understand what's going on in America. Here's where the parallel comes in with them and the media. Remember the statements being made by George Lucas and Steven Spielberg? Hey, these guys are not interested in small ball anymore. They don't want to have an inning where you have a double and a single, somebody walks, you have a sacrifice, and, at the end of the time, you end up with an inning where you have a few runs. No. They want to load up and hopefully hit a home run. So they're not making small budget films. They'll risk $250 million or more on a high budget film, hoping that it hits. And when it doesn't, I'm not exactly sure what they're supposed to do. How does this line up with the mainstream media, for example? What happened to just newscasting? Now we have to have shows and we have to make stars out of quote unquote journalists, but we don't have reporters anymore. What we have are personalities. You would rather try to make someone into a personality than simply allow someone to report the news. That's what you push. What about those less costly options? Well, heck, the internet is eating your lunch. Foreign sources of information are becoming more trustworthy. To be honest with you, I find Al Jazeera America more reliable as far as being objective in their reporting than ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, you name them, Fox even. So you can't compete with them. And what people want is for someone to tell them what's happening, not simply to tell them what they think. They don't want made up stuff from a news standpoint. They may want that when they go to the theaters, but in the news, they just say, the reality is deep enough. Just tell me that. But the last one that Wahlberg hit on, Hollywood is really out of touch. They don't care about what people think. Their intent is to make people think a certain thing. They want to control what you think. Mika Brzezinski recently admitted as much. It's our job to tell people what to think. And that is a problem. And that's the real problem. Why is that? Do you remember Hollywood, along with the mainstream media in the most recent election, were dead set against Donald Trump getting any type of momentum? How many campaigns did you hear from the media and also Hollywood against Donald Trump? You can't vote for him because of this. You can't vote for him because of that. We need to stand up against him and everything else. They opposed him during the primaries. They opposed him during the general election. They opposed. Mainstream media did the same thing. He can't win. There's no way he could possibly ever win. They were hand in hand saying the same thing, slapping the face of the American electorate, who basically said, we've listened to you and look where we are. You may remember all of the media that was boldly predicting near landslide victories for Hillary Clinton. They weren't hedging their bets either. There's no way that Donald Trump could win. Here is my point. In the same way that the press has become less popular than the man that they vilify on a regular basis, Hollywood is taking on the same tactics, swinging for the fences on things that people don't necessarily want to see in hopes that sooner or later something is going to actually register. Having problems competing with less costly options and less informative options, quite frankly, print news media is dying. The New York Times, hemorrhaging money. But the biggest thing is, there's the American people on one side and the mainstream media and the entertainment industry on the other. The one that makes the most noise, which is not the American people, it is the media and the entertainment industry. They have no clue. They have no understanding. They are out of touch. And as a result, Hollywood is suffering. They're losing money. It's not even close. I believe it is, yes, Breitbart, of all people, worst box office in 25 years. Hollywood's problems are permanent and deep. And among the things they mentioned, their product is ridiculous. It's very expensive. It's not imaginative. Their ideas, the long-standing joke that Hollywood is officially out of ideas, is no longer funny. They made the Emoji Movie. Captain Underpants. Really? Customer service. There's a whole lot of things wrong. And they're going to stay wrong. Because until you decide to become American in your perspective again, which means having empathy for the American people who do not make millions of dollars for producing nothing that anyone can actually use. That's the same thing that happens with the media and the entertainment industry. You're never going to have the support of those people again. You don't identify with them, and then most of you don't even try. That's going to have to change if you're going to matter anymore. Until then, the dodo bird ain't around either, and you're heading in that direction. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, talkamericaradio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida, freedominamericaradio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, as Hurricane Harvey was set to come to land in the Gulf Coast and hit Texas as hard as it did, Donald Trump made an announcement, and that announcement was that he was going to pardon, or had pardoned, Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Arizona. Now, of course, that was met with certain reactions back and forth. Of course, the liberal left, particularly those in the immigrant community, saw this as a personal affront to them, not surprisingly, and they criticized the president heavily for that. He really did not care. And then you find out that the timing of the announcement was sheer brilliance. And I'm just going to let you listen, and you can understand why that was the case.
Mr. President, thank you so much. President Niinistö, I have a question for you as well, but if I could start with President Trump. In the middle of Hurricane Harvey hitting on Friday night, you chose to pardon former Sheriff Joe Arpaio. I wonder if you could tell us what was behind your thinking for issuing a pardon for the sheriff, and as well, what do you say to your critics, even some in your own party, who say it was the wrong thing to do?
Well, a lot of people think it was the right thing to do, John. And actually, in the middle of a hurricane, even though it was a Friday evening, I assumed the ratings would be far higher than they would be normally. You know, the hurricane was just starting. And I put it out that I had pardoned, as we say, Sheriff Joe. He's done a great job for the people of Arizona. He's very strong on borders, very strong on illegal immigration. He is loved in Arizona. I thought he was treated unbelievably unfairly when they came down with their big decision to go get him right before the election voting started, as you know, and he lost in a fairly close election. He would have won the election, but they just hammered him just before the election. I thought that was a very, very unfair thing to do. When I mentioned him the other night, you saw the massive crowd we had. The people went crazy when I said, what do you think of Sheriff Joe, or something to that effect. The place went absolutely crazy when I was in Arizona last week. And as far as pardons are concerned, I actually did this just before the meeting because I assumed that somebody would ask me the question. I didn't know it would be you. As you can attest, you didn't even know you were going to be called. But I thought I would. And, you know, Sheriff Joe is a great veteran of the military, great law enforcement person, somebody that's won many, many elections in the state of Arizona. But I wanted to look at some of the other people that were pardoned over the years. And if you look at, as an example, President Clinton pardoned Mark Rich, who was charged with crimes going back decades, including illegally buying oil from Iran while it held 53 American hostages, wasn't allowed to do that, selling to the enemies of the United States. He was pardoned after his wife donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Clintons. Then you have dangerous criminals. President Clinton pardoned Susan Rosenberg, a member of the Weathered Underground, charged as part of a bank robbery that led to a guard and 2 police officers being killed. Drug dealers. President Clinton commuted the sentence of Carlos Vignali, a central player in a cocaine ring that stretched from California to Minnesota. Criminal leaker. You've heard the word leaker. President Obama commuted the sentence of Chelsea Manning, who leaked countless sensitive and classified documents to WikiLeaks, perhaps and others, but horrible, horrible thing that he did, commuted the sentence, and perhaps pardoned. President Obama commuted the sentence of Oscar Lopez Rivera, who was charged as part of a violent independence group from Puerto Rico responsible for 28 Chicago area bombings and many deaths in the 1970s and 1980s. Sheriff Joe is a patriot. Sheriff Joe loves our country. Sheriff Joe protected our borders. And Sheriff Joe was very unfairly treated by the Obama administration, especially right before an election that he would have won. So, and he was elected many times. So I stand by my pardon of Sheriff Joe, and I think the people of Arizona who really know him best would agree with me. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, I'd like to claim prescience that you did all the research, but I'm afraid I have to confess the question was fairly obvious.
The obvious thing, or most obvious thing about it, is that Donald Trump set it up. He could have announced the pardon. He delayed announcing the pardon. Donald Trump is not an idiot. I know very many people think that he is, particularly those who lean left and those in the communities of color. But he's not an idiot. You heard him. Why do you announce it then? Well, I knew there was going to be coverage of that, and I knew a question was going to come. So let me do this. I'm going to make sure that the question comes when you're actually covering it, as opposed to basically not covering it, and I don't get to answer the question on air, and you get to spin it any way you want. I will answer the question when the full spotlight is on me to answer that question, and I know if I announce it at this time, you will do two things. You will cover it, and you will ask it. He plays these guys. It is astonishing how well Donald Trump manipulates the media. It's the interesting thing about it to me is that he doesn't even try to hide it. The other interesting thing to me is that the media can never seem to avoid going for the okie doke. The way he handled the Arpaio pardon was brilliance. Why is it brilliant? Because instead of the only thing you hear about the Arpaio pardon are all the negative statements coming from the left and from the progressives within the Republican Party, or those who are trying to appease progressives within the Republican Party. Instead of all you hearing is that and how it's bad and all the things that have been going on to denigrate Joe Arpaio, President Trump set it up so that a positive statement and a comparative statement. After that statement and the accuracy that it contains, how are you going to criticize Trump? Trump criticized somebody who was hit on a misdemeanor charge of contempt of court that was pretty much trumped up. How does that compare with Mark Rich? How does that compare with members of the Weather Underground? How does that compare with someone who was a terrorist and blowing up things in Chicago? How does that compare with the people whom Barack Obama pardoned? It doesn't. The people that these other presidents have pardoned did harm, sometimes grievous and homicidal harm, to citizens of the United States. No one ever accused Joe Arpaio of that. And the only thing they could convict him of was a misdemeanor contempt charge. So, if you want to attack Donald Trump on Arpaio, you got a lot of things you got to wade through with Clinton and Obama. Now, this isn't the first time, and in my opinion, may not even be the best instance demonstrating how effective Donald Trump is at playing the media. Back in September, he had an announcement regarding the birther issue at his new hotel in Washington, D.C.
We're at Donald Trump's new hotel in Washington, D.C., and he just gave a master class in how to play the media. Trump held his first press conference at his brand new hotel, but he didn't take questions. He's now got an address on Pennsylvania Avenue down the street from the White House and a fancy gold-plated ballroom to speak directly to the press in one of the media hubs of the country. It's probably no coincidence that this is his brand new hotel that he wants to get press and attention for.
Nice hotel. Under budget and ahead of schedule. Isn't that nice?
At today's event, for the first half hour, Trump let Veterans for Trump talk about how great they think Trump is. And the cable networks ran it.
Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Mr. Trump.
Cable networks don't typically show that kind of thing. They switch back when the candidate actually starts speaking. But that didn't happen with Trump's event today. After that, he talked for less than 5 minutes about the thing he baited journalists in with.
President Barack Obama was born in the United States, period.
Trump knows how to use the press, and at his new hotel, he's definitely taking advantage. For Newsy, I'm Kate Grumke.
He baited them in. While they were waiting on him to make this final admission, or this long coming admission that Donald Trump was wrong about saying that Barack Obama was not born in the United States, and to become contrite, I imagine, show some contrition regarding the birther movement. Instead, you saw Medal of Honor winners, respected generals and other people, military analysts, the rest, basically put on a clinic of saying how wonderful Donald Trump would be for America as the commander-in-chief, how much regard they had for him. This went on for the better part of a half hour. And then he simply says, guys born in the United States, let's call it a day, and walk away. Interesting thing to me is CNN actually acknowledging, in the person of John King, exactly what Trump had done.
Now, not to mention her in the same breath, but Hillary Clinton and her campaign of 2008 started the birther controversy. I finished it. You know what I mean. President Barack Obama was born in the United States, period. Now we all want to get back to making America strong and great again. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I had the great good fortune, if you want to call it that, of interviewing Donald Trump. The interview was previously scheduled on the very day Barack Obama released his long-form birth certificate. And on that day, Donald Trump said that he had done the country a great service after he had done the country a great disservice by becoming the chief cheerleader for a fraud, a birther movement trying to delegitimize the sitting United States president. So I really don't quite know what to make of that, except for that we got played, again, by the Trump campaign, which is what they do.
That's what they do. Trump plays the media. He plays the media. He did that during the campaign. He did that on the night that Hurricane Harvey hit the Gulf Coast. Now, if the media knew this back in September of 2016, why do they keep going for the okie doke? Even when he was, and the president-elect had not yet been inaugurated, Mike Barnicle on MSNBC had to make certain acknowledgments as well.
Ask him offhand. Okay, I understand what you're doing with Mexico. And that is, he's setting up negotiations. I understand what he's doing with China, setting up negotiations. And he's got really smart, people coming in, whether you're talking about Wilbur Ross or whether you're talking about, half of the people from Goldman Sachs. And they're figuring out, they're digging into the deals. I get all that. But I said, I don't get the Russia thing. And if we do the interview, that's one of the things I'm going to really press you on. And he said, and I really haven't seen any articles even suggesting this. He said, the last two presidents have tried to push Russia into a corner. And, under Bush, Putin invaded Georgia. Under Obama, he invaded Ukraine, Crimea. And he said, and I thought this was interesting, he said the worst thing Barack Obama ever did was call them a regional power. Because for decades, everybody's been saying that their foreign policy is driven by what? Resentment. And he said, so let's see. Let's see what happens if we go out there and are positive. It can't be much worse than it was over the past 8 years. And if it is, then we'll correct.
Well, you're sort of going around a central point that is on read that's on the teleprompter here. The media, unfortunately, large parts of the media, not all of the media, have spent so much time obsessing over his tweets to the exclusion of, have you received a full intelligence briefing yet, Mr. President-elect? And you'd realize, when you think about it, that Donald Trump is playing us. Yes. Quite successfully. Quite successfully. Because I don't know, not that I should, just me, but whether he has received a full intelligence briefing. Right. I don't know that he's fully addressed, even in part, the relationship with Russia that he hopes to find going forward. Right. We don't know any of that, but we know every single tweet. Yeah. We know all about the tweets.
But when he's not having press conferences, we're so defended. He controls the forum.
Yeah. Donald Trump controls the forum all the time. And this is really what it comes down to. The media hates Donald Trump so much. They're like a boxer who has abandoned all their training just so they can hit somebody one time. And the person they want to hit is very skilled and is going to use that blind rage to counterpunch that poor fool half to death. And that's what Donald Trump does. And the funny thing to me is that the media knows it, the media acknowledges it, and they still stick their chin out there, and Trump has yet to miss. He nails them every time they do it. They know what he's going to do. They know when they're being set up, and they lead with their chin anyway. They're crazy. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 in North Florida. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. While everyone is paying attention to North Korea, they're trying to get back on track with Russia because the Harvey story that was supposed to make Trump look like a terrible person isn't quite working out that way. So while you're looking at Trump, North Korea, Russia, and whatever else you want to come up with, you're stuck with something that is very, very unexpected. Well, unexpected for those who weren't paying attention to what Trump was campaigning about in the first place. CNBC, as of Wednesday, the 30th of August, U.S. revised second quarter GDP up 3% versus 2.7% rise expected. The U.S. economy grew faster than initially thought in the second quarter, notching its quickest pace in more than 2 years. There are signs that the momentum was sustained at the start of the third quarter. Gross domestic product increased at a 3% annual rate in the April to June period, the Commerce Department said. It's the economy, stupid. So, for those who need a reminder of what we're coming out of, I offer this.
On April 28, 2016, the United States Commerce Department made the historic announcement that the gross domestic product, or GDP, grew at an anemic rate of a paltry 0.5%. That followed a pale fourth quarter advance of 1.4%. This puts Barack Obama on track for about a 1.5% for his 8-year term, and it gives him the dubious distinction of having been the first U.S. president in history not to see a single year of 3% GDP growth. In comparison, President Ronald Reagan oversaw a real annual GDP growth rate of 3.5%, more than double that of Obama, whose economic record is on track to rank the fourth worst of any president in history. But keep in mind, these statistics are coming from the Obama administration, and there are plenty of ways to cook the books, so to speak, even with numerous gourmet economic chefs working overtime, trying to find something redeemable about Obama's economic record. This is the best they can do? Makes me wonder, is it possible that someday historians will look back and determine that the record of this current Obama nation was the worst in history? Ouch.
Exactly. Barack Obama was the first U.S. president to not see a single year during his presidency where the United States had 3% GDP growth or higher. Not one. From George Washington all the way to George Bush, every one of those presidents saw at least 3% at least 1 year during their term as president. So when you put that together with the fact that all the presidents combined up to Barack Obama didn't create as much debt as he did. He basically doubled the national debt. So when you put all this together, couldn't get the economy to grow, worse than any other president, grew the debt more than any other president. The guy stank on ice. He was pathetic. Now, of course, people are still running interference for him, lying for him, trying to say it doesn't matter, trying to call what you had for the last 8 years an economic recovery. No, not by American standards. The Secretary of Commerce under Donald Trump went back out in April and let people know after a first quarter that seemed promising, he actually thought this about the prospects of 3% GDP growth.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. What about this of 3% GDP growth? Is that a fair assessment? Is that something that is realistic? Do you believe it's realistic?
Well, I would hope that the growth could, over time, get to be better than that. President Obama is the only president in many that didn't have at least 1 year of 3% growth. And with all the initiatives that we're doing, the regulatory reform, the trade reform, the tax reform, hopefully, and unleashing energy, there's no reason we shouldn't be able at least to hit that, if not beat it.
So he believes that not only will we be able to get to 3%, he actually believes with certain measures that are being taken that the American economy during the time of the Donald Trump administration should be able to exceed GDP growth of 3%. Well, of course, there are people who say that can't happen because it's Donald Trump, because of all other things, because the American economy has changed. Paul Krugman is out there saying he doesn't think 3% is possible. And then we had this coming out of Bloomberg, I believe it was, regarding the U.S. economy.
Vince, what's your initial read that we have GDP revised for the second quarter 3%, personal consumption 3.3%?
It's a strong number, no doubt about it. And remember, right now, the Atlanta Fed's tracking estimate of Q3 GDP is at 3.4%. So we're growing in excess of potential output growth. We're narrowing resource slack. This suggests that the economy has some real momentum and that it's going to give the Federal Reserve something to think about, i.e. an opportunity to continue to renormalize monetary policy later this year.
Michael, it's a reminder that if you get yourself drowning in political hysteria and geopolitics in North Korea, it's a reminder that actually the fundamentals, the data, they're okay. Sure. They're pretty stable. And they're in some spaces solid.
Right. And I think, this also kind of it helps explain those strong employment reports we had as well over the last few months. It puts those sort of makes everything a little bit more real there. I think that, the broader question though is that while this is an uptick, these GDP prints can move around a bit and I think the broader question is how much can this really impact the markets? Like, the dollar and 10-year Treasury yields have been pushed really hard this week. You're certainly going to see a reaction against it. And I think one of the big market tells will be how aggressive a reaction will they have. All things being equal, you'd expect a pretty major reaction. If they don't move up a lot, I think it's a broader tell about some other factors that are really driving these markets.
I can envision the tweet that we're going to get, Vince, from President Trump. 3% growth, that's my target. Now my reforms can boost it to above 3%, which begs the question, Vince, is this kind of growth sustainable?
3% is probably almost twice the rate of growth of potential output. That means we're narrowing resource slack, and it will be hard to sustain. Tax reform can matter. Ongoing deregulation can matter. But ultimately, an economy gravitates toward its trend. And unless we do something to bend that trend upward, 3% isn't sustainable.
On the margin, though, Vince, inventories were no longer a drag. They were revised up slightly. Exports actually added 0.2%. Could be helped even more by a weaker dollar. At the margin, how significant could those inputs be to, say, the third read of Q2 GDP and then perhaps the third and the fourth quarter?
So, look, I think it tells you we ended the second quarter on a stronger note with less inventories. There's less of a drag associated with that. I think it is both positive about our history last quarter and positive about our current reality this quarter. We're probably growing in excess of 3% for the last 3 quarters of the year. That's good news because we've basically been stuck in a 2% growth channel, for most of this economic expansion. Sometimes high, sometimes low. Yeah. This is one on the high side.
May not be sustainable. Why? Because you've been in such a... He didn't say you couldn't sustain it. He said You need to bend some things upward to support it. But he also said that you're looking to grow at 3% or better for the last 9 months of 2017. Guys, Donald Trump simply did what he said he would do. He didn't grow the economy. No president grows the economy. The only thing a president can do by policies that he makes and legislation that he signs or chooses not to sign is either pump the brakes or hit the accelerator, giving Americans free rein or less room to grow the economy through taking advantage of economic opportunity. Donald Trump is doing everything he can to take the brakes off. And the economy is responding. The fundamentals are good. So, again, let's make this clear. If you're paying attention to the Russia nonsense, it's nonsense. There's never been any evidence, and there never will be any evidence. If you're paying attention to North Korea, which sounds scary, but unless there's an historic change in the way that family, which has been running North Korea now into the third generation, unless there's a significant change in what they do, they're not trying to hurt anybody. They're trying to extort everybody. That's what they've been doing with their nuclear program ever since they announced that they would get one. If you're afraid of North Korea, and I can understand if you're South Korea why you would be, but South Korea is not really afraid of them. They know who they are. If you're afraid of them and don't know who they are, and they don't even have the capability of reaching you, then you're paying attention to the wrong stuff. If you're worried about the hurricane, hurricanes come and hurricanes go in these United States. This one, big as it was, as damaging as it was, will in time be no different than Katrina, no different than Rita, no different than Camille, no different than David. All the other named hurricanes that you can recall that did tremendous devastation, Sandy. The business of the United States has always been business. Getting people to work, making products, selling product, having people confident in their own employment to go out and buy product. That's happening under Donald Trump. And I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, Ron Edwards. And after that, we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
The worst natural disaster in U.S. history has brought out the best in many Americans. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, in recent years, Americans have been more divided than any time since perhaps the Civil War. 49% of Americans clamor for a Venezuelan form of government. Even the Congressional Black Caucus members annually trek to Cuba for training on how to overthrow our constitutional republic form of government. 51% of Americans still believe in the possibility of an America that can be greater than ever. But when it comes down to it, we learn from natural disasters like the record-breaking hurricane of 2017 that no matter what, as Americans, we are at our best when we work together to find the best solutions to whatever challenges we face. Good and decent Americans from all sectors of society reflect the true nature of our republic. Sir Winston Churchill once said, "These are times that try men's souls." That certainly applies to those who have had to endure the loss of home, jobs, and in some cases, their very lives. But through it all, what may come out of this historic disaster is a reemergence of people learning how to reach out to one another and find real solutions that benefit our republic as opposed to destroying her. What was geared towards disaster may in many ways inspire a true rebirth of our republic. I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservative. TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ. Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC. Talk 107.5 in North Florida. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, let's talk about that incredibly shrinking march from Charlottesville to Washington, D.C. in the wake of the white nationalist demonstration back on the 12th of August that resulted in violence and 1 dead and I believe it was 19 injured. As a result of that, you had an action that people were just ready to go do something, and this is kind of what we talked about.
Anti-racism activists are beginning a 10-day march from Charlottesville, Virginia to Washington, D.C. on Monday to protest against a far-right rally in the Virginia city and what they called President Donald Trump's reluctance to condemn its white nationalist organizers. The march to confront white supremacy is the latest demonstration following the August 12th rally in Charlottesville, when one woman was killed after a man drove a car into a crowd of counter-protesters. Organizers of the march said that about 200 people will begin walking on Monday evening from Charlottesville. That number is expected to rise as the march nears its end in Washington on September 6th.
Now, wait a minute. What this particular report fails to mention is that 1,000 people pledged to participate in the march. 1,000. But when they got started, they were down to 200 actually saying they were going to walk. 200. That's an 80% decrease. So for every 5 people that pledged, only 1 showed up to get started. Now, of course, as you do with these type of things, you have to have a motivational speaker, someone to get the crowd riled up and get them ready to really take on this enormous task. Because walking 112 to 116 miles in 10 days, that's not a small commitment. That's not a small effort. And you need to build up some emotion, some momentum, some esprit de corps. You need a pep talk. And this is what they got.
Donald J. Trump says, let's go back to the status quo and make America white again, as though making America white again would make America great again. But I'm saying to you, as a fellow citizen, as a human being, as a brother and sister in the Lord, as a fellow child of God, we are great because we are human. We are great because we're children of God. We are great because we're connected to one another. We are great because we love each other. We are great because we're compassionate toward each other. We are great because we stand against hate. We are great because we refuse to capitulate to cowardice. We refuse to be intimidated by white supremacists. We refuse to go back. We refuse to give in to white nationalists. We refuse to give in to this ugly chapter in American history.
I'm going all the way to D.C. We're marching. We're marching from Charlottesville to Washington, D.C. over 10 days. We'll be in Washington on Wednesday, September 6th. And this is a pilgrimage, so it's meant to build community and neighborship. This is an act of love in every kind of way. And this is a march to reveal to America who it is, that not only what Charlottesville stands for, but what we as a country stand for, and that we will not tolerate any policies that allies itself with white supremacists in this country, ever.
Oh, I'm singing and walking with my mind. Oh, hallelujah, I'm singing and walking with my mind. Stay on free. Yes, sir, I'm singing and walking with my mind. Oh, yes, it is stay on free. Freedom, hallelujah.
So they were supposed to try to keep that type of momentum up for the better part of 10 days. Needless to say, that was a tall order. The more interesting thing is that this march continued to decline. Continued to decline. Again, I said 1,000 people pledged. By the time the march started on the 28th of August, you were down from 1,000 people to 200 people. So you lost 80% of those who, it's easy to pledge. It's not easy to follow through. I understand that. That's not really a big concern. But here is what happened with the march. Now, forgive me, I actually found one of these because you're not going to have the mainstream media pick up on this collapse. So I found another source which has the computerized voice a little bit. So I forgive me for that. But the fact that the voice is so wooden and mechanical actually is a good contrast to what actually happened to this effort to march against hate for 100 miles.
The march to D.C. from Charlottesville, Virginia, started with nearly 200 marchers Monday, but by Tuesday morning there were only 35 marchers. Over 200 people came together today to take a stand against bigotry and hate, march organizers said on Twitter. We're marching from Numberkville to D.C. Join us, kville2dc.us. The overnight rains were enough to keep all but about 35 from marching Monday morning, the day after the pep talk when police escorted the group from Emancipation Park downtown Sunday. We have started the day, the group tweeted shortly after 10 a.m. We have about 35 folks marching against white supremacy. Despite the drastic decrease in numbers, the group still declared a victory, saying not rain nor sleet nor snow nor hail will stop us from marching from Numberkville to D.C. The march was planned as a direct response to the Unite the Right rally held earlier this month in which protesters and white supremacists clashed, resulting in 19 injured and 1 dead in the violence that followed. This is the time to confront white supremacy in our government and throughout our history, the group says on its website about the march. We demand that President Trump be removed from office for allying himself with this ideology of hate, and we demand an agenda that repairs the damage it's done to our country and its people. The group planned out the route that takes the remaining marchers north on US 29, until they reach Interstate 66. They will then make their way to downtown Washington, D.C., where the march will end. The 10-day march will begin at 9:30 a.m. each morning, and vegetarian, vegan, and gluten-free meals will be provided. In addition, the marchers will be provided with housing, and a security detail will follow the group, according to the group's website.
200 started, and by the next morning, you were down to 35. That's another 80% decrease. So from 1,000 people pledging, you lost 80% down to 200. If you lose 80% from there, you actually get down to 40. They were down to 35. This thing was started with significant media coverage, adequate media coverage on a number of outlets, but it dies in silence because it wasn't about anything. The other thing that is now being covered by the media is that these peaceful, uncommitted people are being replaced by very violent, committed Antifa activists. you may have heard that their activities have been deemed terroristic by the U.S. government. What I found interesting is also reports that even before the election of 2016, during the primary season, the government of Barack Obama was documenting how the violence that was happening was coming from what we now call Antifa. They didn't tell anybody. They just kind of kept it to themselves. Amazing. They leak lies about the current president while he was a candidate. They leak lies, and they leak lies after he was president-elect. They've been leaking lies ever since. But the truth about who the left is and who Antifa is and their violence and their subversiveness, that they kept a secret. Didn't put that out there for public consumption. Isn't that interesting? At some point, and I've said this before, you're going to have to recognize that the leftists among you, though they be natural-born citizens of the United States, they are not Americans. America has never been about a birthplace. America has never been about so much a place. America is about believing 5 self-evident truths. I've repeated them over and over again. They're found in the Declaration of Independence, and I don't care where you are or who you are, if you believe those 5 self-evident truths that were laid out in July of 1776, you too have the opportunity to be as much an American as anybody else, no matter where you're born, to whom you're born, the circumstances of your birth, or the capabilities, natural and otherwise, that you possess. But you have people who are born here who hate that ideology, hate the idea that someone operating under the tenets of economic liberty and all freedoms that the God of Israel grants to every man, that and those freedoms are inalienable or unalienable. They don't believe that you should exercise them if it violates their idea of what a quote-unquote fair society would be. So we've gone away from the nonviolent people who want to march because they don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the tenacity. They do not have the commitment. But Antifa looks a lot like ISIS. And those folks may lack a lot of things, but commitment is not among them. So while this march that was ballyhooed and a lot of preaching and a lot of stuff, but as soon as you saw who was marching, you already knew that wasn't going to last, and it didn't, is being replaced by people who hide themselves in all black, put masks on their faces, and will beat you in the middle of the street if you so much as disagree with them. You're not going to talk these people out of their ideology. They're not willing to discuss. People who are willing to discuss do not hide their identity. You're going to have to beat them. And in some cases, it's going to require a physical confrontation to beat them. If you're not ready to do that, then the things that you value most about this country will be increasingly at risk. I don't worry about the leftists who want to preach and who want to march and they're wrong as 2 left shoes, because they'll never amount to anything. It's the ones who've committed to violence. Because before they can be turned around, they will hurt somebody and hurt them badly. It's going to be up to the rest of the nation to stand up and do something about that. I can't wait for law enforcement. I can't wait for the military. By the time they show up, too many people will have been harmed. And then these hooded individuals wearing all black will have slipped back into the shadows from whence they came, not to be recognized, not to be identified. It's not good enough. It's just not good enough. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Question for you. Is Jim Brown greater than Colin Kaepernick? Now, before you answer that in the obvious manner, let's go back to the Colin Kaepernick situation. A lot of this has been romanticized now by those who support him. There's no romanticizing on the side of those who do not support him, which would include yours truly. But on the side of those who support him, there's, oh, he's doing this for everybody, and it's so unselfish. And I always ask questions like, well, where was this before he was sleeping with one of the few heterosexual females associated with Black Lives Matter? Where was all this activism? I don't recall it. But that's just me. Back in 2016, ABC ran a piece on Mr. Kaepernick's protest, and this is how that sounded.
Out of that protest by Colin Kaepernick, 49ers quarterback knelt instead of standing during the national anthem at last night's game. He was not alone. ABC's Kana Whitworth was there and joins us now from San Diego. Good morning, Kana.
Yeah, George, good morning. One of Colin Kaepernick's teammates joined him in taking a knee, and a Seattle Seahawks player also didn't stand for their national anthem. But this morning, Kaepernick says he's willing to make real change and plans on donating $1 million to charities that he's been working with to help end racial inequality.
For the land and of the free.
Overnight, San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick refusing to stand during the national anthem again. This time, he took a knee right behind hundreds of service members being honored on Military Appreciation Night. As the crowd and players stand, you can see Kaepernick kneeling on the sideline. Teammate Eric Reed joining him.
Going to stand. And he's receiving heavy boos here.
The crowd booing every time he took a snap.
He's entitled to his opinion. We fought for that. I just think he's a jerk.
And now the quarterback sparking new controversy for wearing these socks showing police officers as pigs. Those scandalous socks drawing criticism from law enforcement officials across the country. Police in Vermont tweeting, wealthy, privileged person's free speech dehumanizes an entire group of human beings. Sound familiar, Kaepernick?
The socks that were worn, did those not seem negative?
No, that was once again, we have cops that are murdering people. We have cops in the SFPD that are blatantly racist. And those issues need to be addressed.
Players from other teams like Jeremy Lane from Seattle are joining Kaepernick in his seated stand, begging the question, how far will this go?
At this point, I think it will continue to be taking a knee. As far as how long this goes, I'm not sure.
I asked Kaepernick if he plans on taking up the San Francisco Police Association on their invite to visit the academy, and he says yes, adding that he's concerned about racism within the department, saying that some bad cops are giving all cops a bad name. Amy.
All right, Kana, thank you.
That is the biggest load of bull. Let's back up to some things. He says this is not about disrespecting police officers. This is not about disrespecting veterans or the military. But on the night where they are honoring the military in your stadium, you decide to take a knee during the anthem with regard to the flag for which they fought and for which a number of those who served with them died. But you're not disrespecting the military or veterans. Really? Okay, that's nonsense. About wearing the socks that depict police officers as pigs. Now, this is as he's saying that, well, not all the cops are bad, it's the few bad cops. But you're wearing socks that don't say these are the bad cops. It just says cops are pigs. But that's not negative. This is foolishness. And of course, I don't know how long this is going to go. This is where it clinches it for me that this is all about a woman. Because if this was a man looking for some objectives, something to be accomplished, it wouldn't be this open-ended thing. Well, we got to get set. What change we got to change racism. What does that look like? What does that mean? Well, we got cops out there committing murder. You know what? That's a blatant overstatement, and in many cases, an outright lie. The statistics on police violence since 1999 are clear, and the idea that there's increased police use of force was disputed by none other than then Attorney General Eric Holder, while he was serving. This is nonsense. Let me tell you what else is nonsense. Listen to this little very short snippet about Kaepernick explaining his protest.
There are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust, people aren't being held accountable for, and that's something that needs to change. I'll continue to sit. I'm going to continue to stand with the people that are being oppressed. To me, this is something that has to change, and when there's significant change, and I feel like that flag represents what it's supposed to represent, and this country is representing people the way that it's supposed to, I'll stand.
This is about what he thinks, and America is only worthy of his respect and regard when he thinks. You know what? He's perfectly entitled to say that. But again, I'm just going to stand. I'm going to stand with the people. I'm going to stand with the oppressed. How are they oppressed? Oh, well, you got cops killing people. How many people are they killing? Oh, that doesn't matter? Okay. Are black people oppressed by anyone else? Because last time I looked, blacks kill 20 times, 30 times sometimes as many blacks as the police kill in a year. Well, the police have a charge. Well, okay, so I thought we were talking about this brotherhood and standing with the people, so the people you stand with are free to kill each other, and that's not oppression in your mind, because I don't get that. I don't get it. It's an empty protest with no end except one. He continues to sleep with one of the few heterosexual females in the Black Lives Matter movement. That's all this is about. And the people who speak up on his behalf are no less empty regarding what they have in mind for this. For example, LeBron James.
I'm all in favor of anyone, athlete or non-athlete, being able to express what they believe in a peaceful manner. And that's exactly what Colin Kaepernick is doing, and I respect that. I think you guys know when I'm passionate about something, I speak upon it. Me standing for the national anthem is something I will do. That's who I am. That's what I believe in. But that doesn't mean I don't respect and don't agree with what Colin Kaepernick is doing. You have the right to voice your opinion, stand for your opinion, and he's doing it in the most peaceful way I've ever seen someone do something. What I do not like about the situation is the negative attention that has been thrown upon him from certain people, because it's not deserved. He was very educated, very smart, very candid, and very demanding about what he wanted to do, and he didn't ask anybody else to join him. And he did it in the most peaceful manner I've ever seen someone stand up and do something. So I can respect that. And things that I do personally, when I'm knowledgeable about it and I'm passionate about it, I do that as well. And you guys know when those things are, because I tell you.
And again, no specifics. I believe everybody. If you believe everybody should be able to speak up nonviolently for what they believe in, then what problem do you have with people expressing negativity toward Colin Kaepernick so long as they do it nonviolently? For example, the NFL owners, those who are not signing him because they dislike him, are doing it nonviolently. They're not doing any harm to Colin Kaepernick. They just don't want him on their team. Is that wrong? The fans who boo him, the fans who speak against him, they're not doing anything to Colin Kaepernick. Are they harming him? Are they allowed to express their opinion? This is foolishness. And that's why it's not successful, because it is foolishness. It is not based in truth. It does not have a reasonable end. It doesn't have reasonable objectives. They're open-ended and soft and mushy. What do you want, Kaepernick? I want racism to end. Seriously? Get out of here with that foolishness. You sitting up here walked away from a $14.5 million contract, but you want racism to end. What's racism doing to you? Well, the police are shooting people. The police are shooting more white people than they are shooting black people. Are you standing up for that? I don't think so. Jim Brown recently weighed in, and I'll let you know why. The Cleveland Browns, who of course have nothing to do with Colin Kaepernick, I'm not saying that in a negative way, they're just not really associated with Colin Kaepernick. The plague, and I call it a plague, of this nonsense protest begun by Kaepernick, that plague had infected the Cleveland Browns locker room, and there were players who were beginning to sit or take a knee, hands locked together, arms locked, and taking a knee behind the bench during the national anthem. These were during preseason games, but that's what they were doing. Someone caught up with Jim Brown, inarguably in the mind of many, the greatest Cleveland Browns player in that franchise's history. And they asked him about the Colin Kaepernick situation.
So we're here with the great Jim Brown. Jim, break down from your perspective, I think you have a very unique perspective on this, the Colin Kaepernick situation. Whether or not you think he should be playing, what this says about the state of the NFL today. What are your views?
Well, you know, Colin has to make up his mind whether he's truly an activist or whether he's a football player. If you try to be both in a situation, football is commercial, you have owners, you have fans, and you want to honor that if you're making that kind of money. If you have a cause, I think you should organize it, present it in a manner where it's not only you sitting on one knee, but a lot of people that is going to get behind each other and do something about it. If I ask you one question, who is Colin calling on to follow what he's talking about? So many of us have always done it, and we're here to help anyone that wants to do it. But I would advise a young man, if you're a football player, play football. You're going to be a real activist, use your money, use your notoriety. I didn't want to make it this long, but it does have meaning to me, and I think that I want to be in his corner, and I do think God bless him, but that's not my leadership.
You don't believe that in today's NFL you could be both activist and football player?
I think we're always an activist and a football player, but I think you have to understand there's intelligence that's involved. Okay? I can't be two things at once that contradict each other. If I sign for money, then the people I sign with, they have rules and regulations. But I'm going to give you the real deal. I'm an American. I don't desecrate my flag and my national anthem. I'm not going to do anything against the flag and the national anthem. I'm going to work within those situations. But this is my country, and I'll work out the problem, but I'll do it in an intelligent manner.
Well said.
I am an American. I'm not going to desecrate my flag or my national anthem. Jim Brown, unlike Colin Kaepernick, has actually experienced real racism. Jim Brown was a lacrosse player of extraordinary ability while he was at the University of Syracuse, and he had teams that would purposely go out and try to hurt them, and they would talk about it, and they would talk to Jim Brown about it, and they'd ask him, do you know what they're saying? He said, yeah, they're talking about hurting me. They want to hurt me bad. It did not deter him, and he wasn't loved by everybody in the NFL. Jim Brown faced real racism, overcame it, and never lost what makes racism bow down, and that is, in this country, adherence to the American ethic. It is the American ethic that is the antithesis of racism, and that is why it goes the way it goes. So Jim Brown made it very clear, you want to fight against things in America, you do that. But the first thing you do is you identify yourself as an American, and then we can talk. So when the players on the Cleveland Browns during the preseason decided to take a knee, that happened, and then the next week, I'll say it this way, 12 Cleveland Browns chose to follow the Colin Kaepernick example before their preseason game against the New York Giants. But a week later, before their game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, every player and coach stood in respect. When play-by-play commentator Jim Donovan noticed that they were all standing, his partner Doug Deacon gave full credit to Jim Brown, who had met with the players right before the game. Jim Brown, Hall of Fame running back, reportedly told them, "Do not disrespect the flag. Do not disrespect your country." So what is it that makes Jim Brown greater than Colin Kaepernick? When a real black man of accomplishment tells a bunch of privileged white and black football players that this isn't the way to go, when he says that, I dare say it carries more weight than what some half-white dude who can't even find himself on a roster but somehow found himself in your ear might want to communicate. And they've been standing ever since Jim Brown spoke with them, while Colin Kaepernick still can't manage to talk himself onto a roster because his play is never going to get him there. Let's just be honest. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM in North Florida. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Is Louis Farrakhan now among those considered redeemed? Wow. Let's just say if you excerpt things a particular way, you can come up with anything. At the church that I've attended for more than a quarter century, we had a deacon who once made the statement, which takes a little bit of maturity to understand. He said, all false doctrine comes out of the Bible. If you excerpt anything in a particular way, you can make it say something very different than it was intended to say. In this case, we're looking at the words of Louis Farrakhan, a 40-year word trickster. He's been playing games with the language for as long as he's been on the public scene or in the public eye. And recently, he made this statement as part of a long and rambling, because that's all he ever does is speak in long and I'm amazed. I will give him this. For someone who is an octogenarian, to be able to speak for as long as he does and ramble as long as he does and still seem somewhat coherent, that is remarkable. But he said this recently. Actually, it was a July 30th speech that he gave, in which he spoke these words.
I thank God for guiding me. For 40 years absent my teacher. So my next journey will have to answer the question. I'm going to say it. I know that my Redeemer liveth. I know, I'm not guessing, that my Jesus is alive. I know that my Redeemer liveth, and because he lives, yes, sir, I know that I too will pass through the portal of death, yet death will not afflict me. So I say to the devil, I know I gotta pay a price for what I've been teaching all these years. You can have the money, you can have the clothes, you can have the suit, you can have the house, but me, you can't have.
There are a lot of takes on that. Let's look at some. There's an article in afro.com that came out on the 30th of August, and it brings some different things to light. It speaks of a writer for the Christian Post, Leonardo Blair, putting the remarks into the frame of a man facing judgment after his inevitable physical death. Judgment, according to Blair, for his decades of teaching. So you have the prospect of somebody looking at all he said and done for 4 decades and saying, you know, I gotta pay a price. Really? You know, because depending upon what your perspective is regarding you and the gospel, that is probably what's framing your idea of what this man is saying, and that may not be it at all. Dan Calabrese took a more measured approach in a different article for a different publication. He said his first instinct was to find a loophole in his wording. When Farrakhan said, "My Jesus lives," and emphasized the "my," I thought maybe he was trying to give himself license to declare that his Redeemer can be whoever he wants it to be, and that he could express that by referring to said Redeemer as "my Jesus." That would be more consistent with the way Farrakhan has expressed himself throughout his public life. And there you have it. Louis Farrakhan is not a truthful man. He is a clever man. He is a manipulative man. But I always like to watch how he confessed to the daughter of Malcolm Little, you guys call him Malcolm X, for his part in that man's murder. He did it in such a way that he left little doubt that he was complicit in it, but said nothing, of course, that would make him responsible for it. That's how he talks. So when I take 88 seconds out of a speech that probably went more than an hour and a half and try to say that's what Louis Farrakhan was talking about, I don't think so. Let me remind you of this. Now that was done on the 30th. Those 88 seconds came from a speech that was on the 30th of July. On the 20th of August, he spoke for almost 2 hours, speaking about how Christianity was a made-up white religion. So let me get this straight. On the 30th of July of this year, he says, "My Jesus, my Redeemer," emphasis on the "my," lives. Less than a month later, Christianity is a made-up white religion. If you put those things together, then all these folks who are now trying to say that Louis Farrakhan has finally gotten his act together, the problem's not with him, the problem's with you. He doesn't know who Jesus is because he doesn't want to know who Jesus is. He wants to tell you about a Jesus he's willing to accept, one with which the scriptures have no relationship, no cognizance. But it's so easy when you want to believe that if somebody throws anything out there, you just jump all over it. Let me put it this way. One plants, one waters, but God gives the increase. I have so many people worried about what might be an increase that they are leaving out their job. What comes up out of the ground is God's issue. Your job is to plant and to water. If you spent more time worrying about working the ground than what comes up out of it, it would be a lot easier for you to recognize whether or not whatever springs up is of God or it is not. Dude's been around for 40 years on the public scene. Scripture says you'll know them by their fruit. Have you seen any Christ-like fruit from Louis Farrakhan? Are you kidding me? Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. I find this interesting. For those who do not know, I spent most of my formative years in the city of Atlanta. And every so often I pay attention to what goes on there, though I've been gone for quite some time and have no desire at this moment to return. The place has changed way too much. Nevertheless, another change may be afoot, and that would be very interesting. And this would be with respect to what goes on in City Hall.
Just a glimpse now at the new results for Atlanta's mayor's race, and it's going to be a good one, as Mary Norwood leading the group right now in this polling with 25%. Second place, a statistical tie as we speak, with Keisha Lance Bottoms and Peter Amon, as Caesar Mitchell is the only other candidate with more than 10% at this point. Channel 2's Dave Huddleston live at City Hall with one possible scenario that no one saw coming 6 months ago, Dave.
Yeah, Justin, with Peter Amon's 10-point surge and these new poll numbers, if that track record continues, we could see a scenario of a race between the front-runner and the underdog. Atlanta resident Dan Farnsworth plans to vote in the mayor's race.
Caesar Mitchell.
In our exclusive WSB-TV landmark communication poll, Mitchell came in fourth place. We asked 500 active voters, if the election for mayor of Atlanta were held today, for whom would you vote? Mary Norwood wins with 25% of the votes.
Mary Norwood is leading overall and is doing pretty well with all of the demographics, but she's not anywhere close to a majority.
Here's where the race gets interesting. Keisha Lance Bottoms maintains her second-place lead from our exclusive poll in March, but former city administrator Peter Amon surges from 2% to a statistical tie with Lance Bottoms to 12.1%.
We wanted to build a foundation below the waterline and really emerge over time, and that's exactly what we've done.
Amon and Norwood both doing well with white Republican voters. Lance Bottoms tops African Americans and is behind Norwood with women voters.
So again, I think this goes to a runoff in November unless something really big changes.
Which brings up two possible scenarios, a runoff between Norwood and Lance Bottoms.
Women obviously are a very strong voting bloc, but I think most importantly it's about what it means to people throughout Atlanta, no matter their race, no matter their gender.
Or a race between Norwood and Amon, who started as an underdog.
If Peter Amon continues to do better, that you could end up with a scenario that maybe a year and a half ago people would not have envisioned.
And it's still too soon to know if either one of those scenarios will come to fruition. Another interesting note, only 17% of the voters undecided. Our pollster said that's interesting and also pretty low, meaning fewer than 1 in 5 voters is undecided. Reporting live from downtown Atlanta at City Hall, Dave Huddleston, Channel 2 Action News.
Now, that was from the end of August, and the election is going to occur this November on the 7th. Here is what is interesting about this, and you don't pick it up unless you can see the news spot. Mary Norwood, who is the front runner, is a white female. Amon, who is the gentleman who is surging in the polls now, is a white male. Keisha Lance Bottoms is a black female. Atlanta has not had a white mayor in 44 years. But the scenario that he's talking about now could be the runoff, which seems likely at this point because Mary Norwood's significant advantage still hasn't gotten her to 50% of the vote, could be between two white people, a white man and a white woman. At any time when I was growing up in Atlanta, the likelihood that you would have one white person with a legitimate shot at the mayor's office in Atlanta, let alone a runoff between two with no black person in sight, was unthinkable. So why is it thinkable now? Atlanta's got problems. The black people, many of the black people don't want to acknowledge Atlanta's problems. But Atlanta is the most homosexual city in the country with a large black population, a majority black population. Atlanta is the HIV infection capital for black people, not just in the southern United States, not just in the continental United States, not just in North America, but on the entire planet. Then there's the crime. This is a problem place, and they've been run by black folks for 44 years. Don't get me wrong, you're not going to turn out the entire city council and all of a sudden be looking at a whitewash in City Hall. That's very unlikely. But the point is this: even black folks get tired of negrosity at City Hall. Let's keep this in mind. In the last 5 years, there's been a string of white mayors replacing black mayors in American big cities. Philadelphia, Charlotte, Jacksonville, New Orleans have all flipped from black to white mayors within the past 5 years. Now, among the top 15 biggest cities in the country, only one has a black mayor, and that is Houston Sylvester Turner, and that dude clowned Houston with respect to the recent hurricane still hitting that state, Hurricane Harvey, by not evacuating or having plans to evacuate his city as 50 inches of rain headed toward a city built on a marshland. There's one other city that's done this flip, and that would be Detroit.
Detroit's voters destroyed the theory that a white candidate could never win there, easily electing Mike Duggan as mayor.
He has a plan for change. You know, he's talking about changing the way we do things, the way we work in Detroit.
Duggan won over an electorate that's 83% black.
I was not under any illusion about the racial division in this community or this country.
Detroit hasn't elected a white mayor since 1970, when Richard Nixon was president.
I have concluded that the time has come for action.
Three Dog Night topped the charts, and Hawaii Five-0 was a hit show. Duggan was facing off against a fellow Democrat, the county sheriff.
The white candidate was the one who convinced them that he had the right stuff to turn Detroit around.
A former mayor went to jail on corruption charges. Detroit's poverty rate is at 40%, and it has $18 billion in debt.
And Mike Duggan has built a reputation as a turnaround artist, a Mr. Fix-It.
But he'll be forced to work under an emergency manager, appointed by Michigan's Republican governor to take control of the city's budget.
Enough is enough. Let's stabilize and grow Detroit.
Duggan will have to work with city residents and that manager, who trumps even the mayor's authority.
There is no doubt that what we have in common is much more powerful than what divides us.
Now, power is an interesting word because initially, Duggan's not going to have much. Anything that he does that costs money, like tearing down thousands of vacant homes, he has to get that emergency manager's approval. But that manager's term is likely up in September, Wolf. And the fact that Duggan took, say, the medical center with a $500 million deficit and turned 8 years of profits may give him some standing with the governor to exert some more authority before then.
I'd love to see Detroit turn around and come back. It's a great, great city, as you well know. Yep. Chris Lawrence, thanks very much.
83% black is Detroit. They got tired of political negrosity at City Hall that led directly to the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. At least 54% black in Atlanta, down from 61% a few years ago. And maybe they're getting tired of it as well. Here's the interesting thing about this. The problem in all these cities, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Detroit, Charlotte, Jacksonville, New Orleans, getting rid of the black mayor to put a white mayor in there just changes the color of the problem. It doesn't eradicate the problem. All these cities are run by Democrats. It is not the skin tone that has destroyed your city. It is the ideology that underpins it. Detroit was the wealthiest per capita city in North America before you ended up with Democrats taking over. They just happened to be black. Atlanta had a unique situation in that Maynard Jackson, who was mayor when I was there, was an extraordinary individual and very effective, and built his city up instead of either tearing it down or simply presiding over mediocrity and failure. But these other places, Democrats don't serve well in big cities. Their ideology is not intended to build anything, but it's just for them to hold on to power. If enough black cities can show you that Democrats have failed, then maybe something will change. Right now, they're just changing the color of the deck chairs on the Titanic. But the same change that took over the country is going to get down to cities, even black cities, after a while, because nobody likes to fail indefinitely. And that's our show. May God bless you and keep you until next time. And as always, praying for you and your families, that you would make the best decisions for them and hold on to the freedoms that you have in this country that allows you to be the one that makes those decisions. Take care. See you next week.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.